My name is Margaret Ellis. For nearly half a century, I lived a life most would call unremarkable. A retired school teacher, a quiet woman with modest tastes. But what they didn't see, what I never allowed them to see, was that I had been guarding something priceless. Something that defined not only who I was, but what I believed in, a legacy, a promise, and a truth so powerful that when it finally came to light, it would shatter illusions and rebuild what had been broken. This is the story of a mother, a cabin, and a son who forgot what love built until life reminded him. It started with a photograph. In that photograph, I was 25 years old, standing beside my 4-year-old son, Joshua, on the dock of our family's lakeside cabin. Behind us, the wooden structure stood firm, simple, timeless, and hand-built by my father in 1952. My eyes held a flicker of worry. Joshua's smile radiated innocence. It was our last summer there before everything changed. My marriage was ending. My husband, Charles, a high-profile attorney from a wealthy family, had found someone younger. Someone who fit more neatly into the image he wanted the world to see. Our divorce was bitter, public, and humiliating. Charles's legal team, powered by his family's influence, ensured I walked away with next to nothing. They believed they had taken everything from me, but they were wrong. Because 3 months before filing for divorce, I did something few expected from a woman they considered meek. I took action. Knowing the storm was coming, I quietly transferred ownership of the lakeside cabin into a private trust under my maiden name. My college roommate, Ruth, now an estate attorney, helped set up the legal framework. It wasn't about hiding assets. It was about protecting something sacred from someone who only saw dollar signs. To the courts, the cabin had been liquidated. To Charles, it was gone. To Joshua, it was a distant memory. To me, it was everything. Every summer, while Joshua visited his father's new family in Europe, I would return, alone, to the cabin. I painted shutters. I cleaned the dock. I made pancakes on the old cast iron stove. I whispered memories into the walls and placed hope under the floorboards. I dreamed that one day my grandchildren would run across the same wooden floors I once did barefoot. But that dream began to fade. As Joshua grew, so did the distance between us. He was raised on privilege and polished expectations. His father's world, the one of country clubs, investment portfolios, and image, became his compass. He visited less. He called even less than that. And when he did, his words carried undertones I recognized all too well: pity, detachment, and polite disinterest. He saw my life as small. He didn't know that within that modest life was a legacy I had preserved with more dedication than most would give to fortune. Then came Vanessa. Elegant, articulate, born and raised in a world that mirrored Charles's. From the moment I met her, I knew what she saw when she looked at me: a relic, a woman whose relevance had expired. "Joshua tells me you were quite the hostess in your day," she said once, the smile on her lips not quite reaching her eyes. I returned her smile and thought, "Oh, my dear, you have no idea." Still, I kept my peace. I did what mothers do. I hoped, I waited, I believed. Then the invitation came. An engagement party at Charles's lakefront estate, just down the shoreline from our old cabin. The irony was thick. The invitation, written in Vanessa's hand, was courteous, distant. "We're keeping it intimate and sophisticated. No need to bring anything but yourself." So I brought myself, in a simple blue dress and my mother's pearls. I walked into that marble foyer and felt the chill of exclusion immediately. Joshua greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and a glance at my outfit that said everything his words didn't. He gently steered me away from the main room. "The garden terrace is quieter, Mom. You'll like it there." I stayed polite. I smiled. I drifted from conversation to conversation, a ghost in a world I helped build but was no longer invited to inhabit. Then I overheard him. Speaking to a couple near the champagne fountain, Joshua described me not as a mother who raised him alone, who taught hundreds of students to love literature, who sacrificed everything for him, but as someone quaint. Someone limited. "Yes, my mother dedicated her life to teaching," he said with a chuckle. "One of the unsung heroes, even if her world was a little small." It hit harder than I expected, because he meant it. That night I sat at the cabin holding that photograph again. Me at 25, him at 4. My heart heavy with the realization that my own son no longer knew who I was. Then came the moment that would change everything. 3 months before the wedding, Vanessa invited me to lunch. I just wanted to chat about the wedding, she said, her tone rehearsed, the setting uncomfortably upscale. I had already booked my travel, bought my dress. Saved every spare dollar from my pension to be there, but she had other plans. The guest list has gotten complicated, she explained, swirling her glass. There are dynamics, business associates, family connections. We're concerned you might not feel comfortable. Her words danced like perfume over poison. You're suggesting I not attend my son's wedding? I asked. Not at all, she lied, eyes refusing to meet mine. Just that perhaps it would be better to celebrate with you separately, later. She called it an aesthetic decision, I called it erasure. I walked out of that restaurant with my heart shattered, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. They didn't want me at the wedding, but they had forgotten something very important. I still had the cabin, and I was done keeping that a secret. What they had mistaken for meekness had been patience. What they thought was silence had been strategy. They believed I had nothing. They were about to find out how wrong they were. That very night I contacted Ruth again. We reviewed the trust, the ownership documents, the tax records. Every nail, every shingle, every photo, all in my name. All untouchable. And then we made a change. For 40 years I had planned to leave the cabin to Joshua. Now I drafted a new clause. If my son believed I was irrelevant to his wedding, then perhaps the legacy I'd preserved wasn't meant for him after all. The new plan, upon my death or 1 year after formal notification, the cabin would go not to Joshua but to the Pine Valley Conservancy, protected, untouched, preserved in its natural state. Forever. But I left the door slightly open. 1 year to prove that he understood what family meant. 1 year to remember what love built. The reckoning had begun, and it was time for the truth to speak louder than appearances. The evening was crisp and quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I stood before the mirror, fastening the same pearl necklace I had worn to Joshua's engagement party. This time it wasn't a symbol of tradition, it was armor, a reminder of my strength, a truth I had held onto for 40 years. Joshua had invited me to dinner at their high-rise condominium. He said it was just a small gathering. Some wedding updates, he had called it. His voice was casual, too casual. I knew what was coming. But I also knew what they didn't. This time I wasn't coming as a quiet guest. I was coming with the weight of a legacy they had overlooked. The building was sleek and imposing, with polished floors that echoed every footstep. Their unit looked like something from a magazine, glass, chrome, curated art. But the air felt thin, artificial. The table was set for 3, candles lit. Champagne chilled. Vanessa greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. So glad you could join us, Margaret. We have some exciting news. Exciting? I smiled gently and took my seat, placing my handbag carefully on the floor beside me. Inside were 3 documents, the original trust deed, the amendment, and the photographs. It was time. Joshua lifted his glass. To new beginnings and family traditions. The irony of his toast didn't escape me. I touched my glass to his, silently counting the seconds before they said it out loud. And then they did. The wedding venue in Tuscany is exclusive, Vanessa began. We've had to make hard choices with the guest list. There are people from my father's firm, from Charles's circle. It's delicate. We're thinking of your comfort too, Joshua added, eyes carefully avoiding mine. I didn't flinch. You're uninviting me, I said plainly. A pause. Vanessa's expression flickered. Joshua shifted. It's not uninviting, Mom. It's about creating the right atmosphere, we thought. You thought I didn't belong. Their silence was my answer. I reached into my handbag and placed the envelope on the table. Before they could say another word, I slid it across the smooth surface. Before we discuss legacy, I said calmly, there's something you should know about the cabin. Joshua's brows furrowed. What cabin? The one you think we lost, the one your father claimed was sold. Vanessa frowned. The family cabin. Yes. He opened the envelope slowly at first. One by one, the papers unfolded like pages in a storybook he never thought existed. The trust document with my maiden name, 40 years of property tax records, maintenance receipts, photographs, my handwriting in the margins, my footprints in the dust, my soul in the wood grain. Joshua stared at the last photo, a recent one of me sitting on the dock, a book in my hand, curtains fluttering behind me in the windows I'd just replaced. I don't understand, he whispered. I never lost it, I said. I protected it, I preserved it. While you and your father believed it was gone, I was there every summer, alone. Vanessa's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the marble floor. Joshua looked up, his face pale. Why would you hide this? I took a breath. Because I was preserving something bigger than property. I was preserving love, memory, legacy, and you weren't ready to understand it. He shuffled through the documents again. Dad said he was negotiating to buy it back, as a wedding gift. No, I said firmly. He discovered the trust, and instead of asking me, he tried to use it as a trophy, a stage prop for a wedding I wasn't invited to. And he was planning to tear it down. Vanessa blinked. We wanted to rebuild something more modern. More suitable for entertaining, I added. That's what he said. Silence wrapped around the table like a cold wind. Then Joshua's voice cracked. You're punishing us. No, I replied, steady as the lake in the early morning. I'm setting boundaries. You made a choice about what family means, so did I. I pulled out the final paper, the amendment. This, I said, placing it on the table, is a new arrangement. Upon my passing, the cabin will go to the Pine Valley Conservancy. It will be preserved, not developed, protected, forever. Vanessa's voice rose. You're using it as leverage. No, I said again. I'm protecting it from people who don't see its value. Joshua's jaw clenched. We can fight this legally. You can try, but the trust was created before the divorce. Every move documented, and my attorney is one of the best in estate law. He was quiet, stunned. There's one condition, I added. This amendment is not irrevocable yet. You have 1 year. 1 year from today to show me that family still means something to you. 1 year to demonstrate that you value what this place represents. I stood, leaving the papers in their carefully placed positions. You excluded me from your wedding. I won't exclude you from a chance at redemption. As I walked toward the door, Joshua followed, his voice low. I never knew you had this in you, he said. I turned to him, our eyes meeting for the first time in what felt like years. There's a lot you don't know, Joshua, because you never asked. Outside, the air was colder now, but I felt lighter, freer. The weight I had carried alone for decades had shifted. Back at the cabin that night, I stood on the dock and looked across the water. The stars above Pine Valley were just as I remembered, endless and honest. My father's voice echoed in memory. Appearances deceive. Ownership is truth. That night, I reclaimed both. But I didn't know then that the next knock on my door wouldn't come from my son, but from the woman I least expected to understand. 10 days passed. Silence. No calls, no messages. Just the quiet ache of absence, a pain deeper than confrontation. Not knowing if I had severed the final thread between myself and my only child. I moved through my days with practiced grace. I returned to my volunteering at the local library. I tended the garden outside my modest home. But each night I would glance at my phone and feel the weight of the unspoken. Then came the message. Margaret, this is Vanessa. I'd like to speak with you privately. Coffee tomorrow, 10 a.m. Riverside Cafe. No Joshua, just her. I read the message 3 times before responding. Simple, direct, uncharacteristic, I replied with a single word. Yes. The Riverside Cafe was neutral ground. Neither the luxurious spaces she frequented nor the cozy, familiar corners I preferred. When I arrived, I spotted her immediately. Jeans, a simple blouse, no makeup. Her usual armor of elegance was absent. Thank you for coming, she said, rising from her chair. She looked human and something else, unsteady. I wanted to talk woman to woman without Joshua. Without expectations. I nodded and sat. I need to start with an apology, she said. What I did, uninviting you like that, the way I framed it, cowardly and cruel. I said nothing, letting her speak. I let Richard shape that decision. He called it a matter of elegance. But now I see what it really was, erasure. She paused, eyes glancing out the window before returning to me. I grew up in a world where appearances were currency. My parents live in a house where dinner conversations revolve around who was at what fundraiser, who wore what, who sat next to whom. I didn't even realize how much of it I'd internalized. And now I asked gently. Now I see it, especially after you left that dinner. Joshua and we fought for the first time. He was furious, not just about the cabin, but about what it meant, what it revealed about you and him. Her voice wavered slightly. I asked him something simple. If this isn't about the cabin, then what is it about? And he couldn't answer. He realized he didn't know you, not really. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, scrolling through photographs. I looked through the pictures you gave him, The cabin, the care in every detail, the curtains, the garden, the lake at sunset. It wasn't just a building, it was a beating heart. She turned the screen to me. I want this for my children. I want them to know this place, to know you. I held her gaze, measured, guarded, and Joshua. He's reeling, she admitted. He's been speaking with Richard every day. Richard is pushing for legal action, but Joshua, he's questioning. For the first time, he's really questioning. I waited, she wasn't finished. I canceled the wedding. That caught me off guard. Not the marriage, she added quickly. Just the event. Tuscany, the guest list, the sponsors, the photography team. All of it gone. Why? Because I realized I was replicating my parents' marriage. Polished, public, hollow. Her eyes were wet now, not tears of manipulation, of truth. I want to marry Joshua, she continued. But not in a place where his mother isn't welcome. Not in a world where love is curated for likes and guest lists. She reached into her bag again and pulled out a folded paper. Not legal, handwritten, a new plan. If Joshua agrees, a wedding at the cabin, simple, honest, real. Her voice lowered. And I need to ask, if we do this, if we honor what this place means, would you consider reversing the trust amendment? I studied her. The Vanessa I once believed was cold, calculated, status-driven, now sat across from me with clarity in her voice and humility in her posture. 6 days ago, I might have called this a performance. Now I sense something else. Awakening, why are you really here? I asked. She looked up. Because I want a relationship with the woman who protected a legacy for 40 years without asking for praise. I want to learn from her. I want my children to know her. It was honest, vulnerable, and perhaps brave. We spoke for another hour about family, about pressure, about love, and about what happens when appearances fall away and something true is left standing. As we rose to leave, she surprised me with a question. Would you show me the cabin? Not Joshua, just me. I want to see it before I try to help him understand it. I nodded yes. I think that would be a good place to start. We scheduled the trip 3 days later, just the two of us. And as I drove away from the cafe, a thought came unbidden and unexpected. Perhaps this woman, this girl I had misjudged, might just be the bridge between my son and the truth. 3 days later, I drove the familiar winding road to Pine Hollow, the trees forming a green canopy overhead, the breeze carrying the scent of earth, bark, and memory. Beside me sat someone I never imagined would come to understand this place, much less walk its wooden floors in reverence. Vanessa. She was quiet for most of the ride, her gaze drawn to the shifting landscape outside her window. Every so often, she would ask about a tree species, a slope, the origin of the road. There was no pretense in her questions, only curiosity, the kind born from a soul realizing it had missed something essential. As we rounded the last bend, the cabin came into view. She gasped, not dramatically, just one sharp, intimate intake of breath, the kind you release when beauty takes you by surprise. The afternoon sunlight filtered through tall pines, casting gold shadows across the cedar siding, which I had stained just the previous summer. The shutters gleamed in that deep forest green my father had loved. Flowers I'd planted decades ago, lilies, wild daisies, still returned each year in defiance of time. The photos didn't do it justice, Vanessa whispered. It feels sacred. I parked and turned off the engine. It is, I said simply. Inside, the air was warm, the wood walls holding the day's heat. The cabin was alive in that quiet, knowing way some places are, the way libraries feel or old chapels. This was my father's masterpiece, I said as we stepped through the door. Not a project, a purpose. Vanessa wandered slowly, her fingertips grazing the grains of the mantel, the corners of hand-carved furniture. In the kitchen, she traced the edges of the old cast-iron stove. In the reading nook, she paused beside the stack of poetry books still in their original cloth bindings. I thought your son was your legacy, she said softly. He was, I replied. And I had hoped this place would one day be his too. But a legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what others are willing to carry forward. We moved through the rooms. Joshua's childhood bedroom still held the adventure books he used to love, worn from small fingers and sun. Vanessa picked one up, smiling faintly. He never told me about this, she said. I'm not sure he remembers, I replied. He buried this part of himself when he embraced Charles's world. Outside, we stood at the edge of the dock as a breeze rippled across the lake. The sun hovered over the treetops, throwing amber light across the water. Vanessa broke the silence. I went to see Charles. I turned to her startled, you what? I needed to hear his version, to know what he really believed about this place. About you. And, I asked carefully, he called it sentimental, worthless. He said you wouldn't have known what to do with it even if you'd kept it, that tearing it down was the only sensible option. Her voice tightened. He said your emotions always got in the way of logic. I nodded slowly. That's always been his frame, appearances over roots, image over intention. Vanessa turned toward me, her eyes sharper now, but I saw this place. I saw what 40 years of quiet care looks like, and I realized maybe he's wrong, maybe he always was. We walked back inside and she sat at the dining table handcrafted by my father in 1960. Solid, beautiful. She rested her hand on it with something approaching awe. I don't want to just use this cabin, she said. I want to understand it to be worthy of it. I sat across from her, and for the first time we weren't mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We weren't two women from different worlds, we were just two people sitting in the house love built. Then start by seeing it not as a gift, I said gently, but as a responsibility. She nodded. That night we lit candles and talked until late, about the woman her mother used to be before wealth silenced her, about the years I spent stitching meaning into every corner of a life most would overlook. She listened, really listened. And as we stood at the door the next morning, she surprised me once again. I want Joshua to see this, she said. Not just the cabin, but you, the you I saw this weekend. I took her hand, warm, firm, honest. Then bring him, I said, but don't come with promises, come with truth. As she drove away, I stood on the porch and watched her disappear around the bend. Something had shifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the forgotten one. The relic, the obstacle, I felt like a bridge. And the cabin, the thing I had protected in silence, was finally ready to speak. It was evening when he arrived. Joshua texted me first, no long message, just a question. Can we talk? I'm outside. I stepped onto the porch and there he was, leaning against his car. No suit, no polished mask. Just a man, rumpled, tired, carrying something heavy in his chest. He looked at me, then past me toward the house. I gestured for him to come inside. He hesitated, then followed. Inside, he stood in the living room for a long moment, his eyes slowly scanning every detail. The bookshelf my father built. The quilt my mother sewed. The watercolor of the lake painted in 1971 by my aunt still hanging over the fireplace. He didn't speak right away. I didn't remember any of this, he said finally. I gestured to the couch. We sat still with space between us like strangers who used to be something more. I've been speaking with Dad's lawyers, he said. They think we could challenge the trust amendment, argue that it was concealed during the divorce, that it was manipulative. I nodded. I expected that. But then Vanessa asked me a question. I waited. She asked, why would your mother preserve something for 40 years if she never meant for you to have it? And what did you say? I asked softly. I didn't have an answer, he admitted. Not one I could believe. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. For years, I thought I knew you. I thought your life was small, safe, predictable. I thought Dad gave me everything. But this house, this secret, it's not small. It's massive, and I had no idea. I let the silence stretch. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Will you show it to me? 3 days later, we drove up to the cabin together. He didn't speak much during the ride. He kept glancing out the window as though preparing for a reckoning. When the cabin came into view, he said nothing at first. Then, softly, it's exactly like I remember. I unlocked the door and let him walk in ahead of me. He moved slowly, deliberately, touching walls, brushing his fingers across shelves, pausing in doorways. In the reading nook, he stood for a long time. I sat here when I was 5, he said, reading the wind in the willows. You used to bring me hot chocolate. His voice cracked slightly, and you taught me chess on the porch. We stepped outside. The dock stretched into the lake just as it had all those years ago. I thought I'd forgotten all of it, he said. But being here, it's like it never left me. We stood in silence for a while, watching the sun ripple across the water. Then he turned to me. Will you teach me? I looked at him unsure. Teach you? How to care for this place? Like you have. My throat tightened. He continued. I want to learn how to repair the shingles, how to patch the windows, how to fix the stone hearth. I want to earn this legacy. Not inherit it. It was the first time he'd ever asked me to teach him something since he was a boy. I would like that, I said. From that weekend forward, Joshua came every Saturday. We worked side by side, replacing siding, sanding beams, preserving what time and weather had threatened. And in those hours, we talked. For the first time in decades, he asked about me, not about what I needed, but who I had been. How I had managed alone, what it felt like to love something enough to stay silent for 40 years. I thought silence meant powerlessness, he said once. No, I replied. Silence can be strength when it's chosen. He paused. And when it's not, then it becomes erasure. He nodded, understanding, and he was beginning to. Then, one stormy afternoon, as thunder rolled across the lake, he told me something unexpected. I've been offered a promotion, he said. Senior vice president, more money, prestige. That's wonderful, I said, though his tone suggested it wasn't. It would mean working directly with Dad, his connections, his clients. I'd be his successor. And what's the alternative? I asked. There's a position opening up in the sustainable finance department. Less prestigious, lower pay, but it's focused on environmental investment, legacy funds, real impact. And what does your heart say? He looked out at the lake, its surface dancing with rain. My heart says I've been building a life that wasn't mine, that maybe it's time to build something different. I nodded, then build it. 2 days later, he called to say he'd turned down the promotion. I told Dad, he said. He was furious, but I didn't flinch. I knew why I was saying no. That weekend, he brought Vanessa with him. They walked the shoreline together, hands intertwined. They asked if they could be married there, at the cabin, just family, just truth. I said yes, but what came next would change everything. The morning sun broke through pine branches, scattering gold light across the lake. Dew shimmered on the grass, and the air smelled of cedar, wildflowers, and coming change. It was their wedding day, but not the wedding they had once planned. No villas, no curated guest list, no branded hashtags, just a dock, a lake, a cabin, and the people who truly mattered. We had spent weeks preparing. Stringing lights through the trees, polishing the old wooden benches, restoring the path my father had laid stone by stone half a century ago. Joshua arrived early. He helped set up chairs, lay tablecloths, even helped cook. Not once did he check his watch or step aside to take a call. He was fully there, present, rooted. Vanessa arrived not long after. Her dress was simple, elegant, flowing like water with each step. No heels, no diamonds. Just a crown of wildflowers in her hair. She came to me in the cabin's back room where I was ironing a linen runner for the dining table. I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice low, not just for the cabin. For everything. I turned to her, gently fixing a strand of hair that had come loose. You saw the truth, I said, and you chose it. That takes more courage than most people know. She nodded. I almost didn't. But you did. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded letter. My mother wrote this after visiting the cabin last week, she said. She came early, walked the grounds, sat by the lake. And she cried. I opened the letter later that evening. In it, Vanessa's mother had written, I had forgotten what real looked like. I had traded wonder for wealth. But your cabin reminded me. Thank you for guarding what the world forgot. I folded the note and placed it beside my father's old compass in the cabin drawer. A keepsake, a symbol of direction rediscovered. The ceremony took place at the edge of the dock, the lake behind them gleaming like polished glass. They read vows they had written themselves, simple, profound, without flourish. We promised to build not for applause, but for endurance. To preserve not just each other, but the legacy we carry forward. To speak the truth, even when silence is easier. The guests were few, family, a few close friends, and 2 retired teachers I had once mentored. And then, just when we thought the ceremony was over, Joshua turned to face the small group. There's something I want to share, he said. Something about this place, and about the woman who made today possible. He looked at me, his eyes softer than I had seen since he was a boy. My mother preserved this cabin for 40 years, he began. She protected it during a divorce, cared for it in silence, and kept it from people who didn't understand its worth. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Richard, standing off to the side with his polished shoes in soft earth, looked visibly uncomfortable. But more than that, Joshua continued, she preserved something deeper, a belief. That legacy is not wealth. It is not photographs or prestige. Legacy is care, attention, quiet devotion. He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. I recognized it instantly. my mother amended the trust. This cabin was to be donated to a conservancy, protected from us, from development, from the very values that nearly destroyed what it stood for. He paused, and she gave me a year, 1 year to prove that I understood. He turned to me. I don't want to inherit this cabin. I felt my chest tighten. I want to be its steward, not its owner. I want to protect it the way she did, with intention, with humility. He opened the envelope. It's a new amendment, he said. Signed yesterday, it keeps my mother as sole steward during her lifetime. And afterward, the cabin will pass to a multi-generational trust, ensuring it's never sold, never torn down, and never stripped of its meaning. There was a hush as people took in the words. Vanessa reached for his hand. He held it tightly. I once thought I had to choose between legacy and freedom, he said, but I've learned real freedom comes from honoring what came before you, not escaping it. He stepped off the dock and placed the new trust document in my hands. Thank you for never giving up on me, he said. I was speechless. I took the envelope with shaking fingers, the weight of what it represented settling in my hands and my heart. Later that night, as we sat around long tables under lanterns strung through the trees, people shared stories not of power or success, but of kindness, memories, laughter, and things built to last. Even Richard, visibly quieter than usual, stood to speak. I was wrong, he said, his voice low, about this place, about what matters. It wasn't an apology, but it was a beginning. The wedding ended as night fell. The lake mirrored the stars. The music faded into soft conversation and eventually silence. I sat alone on the dock, barefoot, the new amendment in my lap. The wind rustled the trees like a whisper from my father. This is what we built it for. I closed my eyes and smiled. The cabin wasn't just preserved, it was reborn. The morning after the wedding, the cabin was quiet, dew clung to every surface. The fire pit held the faintest trace of smoke. Empty wine glasses sat abandoned on stumps and railings like forgotten memories of joy. Inside, Joshua and Vanessa were still asleep in the master bedroom, now theirs for the week. A soft sunrise poured in through the curtains I had sewn 2 summers ago, the same ones I once replaced alone, stitching in silence, never knowing if they would be appreciated. I stepped outside with my coffee and sat on the porch swing. It creaked softly beneath me, keeping time with the breeze. A car door opened in the distance. It was Patricia, Vanessa's mother. She approached slowly, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. She sat beside me on the swing. I wanted to thank you, she said, for preserving this place, for what it's done not just for them but for me. I looked at her, surprised. My father was a quiet man, she continued. Carpenter, built birdhouses, fences. Never got invited to parties. My husband made me believe that legacy meant upward movement. More, better, faster. She looked out across the lake, but this place reminded me that legacy is sometimes standing still, holding on to something, letting it age with grace. She stood to leave, then paused. You changed more than a family this week, she said. You reminded people of who they used to be. When she left, I stayed on the porch for a long time, thinking about those words. That evening, Joshua joined me on the dock. He had changed into jeans and a worn sweater I hadn't seen since college. He looked younger, lighter. He handed me a journal. I've been writing, he said, about the cabin, about you. About me. I opened the first page, his handwriting still as neat as when he was 12. Legacy is not what we leave behind, it's what we protect long enough for someone else to rediscover. I closed the journal, my heart full. Then he said something I never expected. I want to start a foundation, a program for children in the city, nature retreats, a place for kids who have never seen stars without streetlights. I want to use the cabin after you, of course, when the time is right. Tears welled in my eyes. This was the redemption I never asked for but had always hoped for, and he continued. I know it doesn't erase the years I wasn't listening, the times I looked down on what you built, but I want you to know I see you now, not just as my mother, but as the architect of my values. It was the recognition I had longed for, not praise, not performance, just truth. Over the next few months, things changed more. Joshua took the job in environmental investment. Vanessa helped design a conservation education wing for a local nonprofit. The cabin became more than a family space, it became a compass for their lives. We still gathered every weekend. Mending, cleaning, restoring, but also storytelling, teaching, laughing. Vanessa's pregnancy announcement came one autumn evening as we roasted marshmallows by the fire. She placed a hand on her belly and whispered, "Your grandchild will know these trees, these waters, this porch." I cried then, not because of fear or pain, but because for the first time in decades, I knew everything I had held onto, every moment of silence, every decision to preserve, every lonely visit to the cabin, it had not been in vain. The following spring, they held a naming ceremony at the lake for their daughter. Her name, Margaret, not Margaret, but close enough to know the story would live on. As the years passed, the cabin remained the same in all the ways that mattered, and changed in the ways it needed to. Children laughed where silence once stood. Gardens bloomed in places that had grown wild. And I, no longer invisible, no longer misunderstood, became not just a figure of the past, but a present force in their lives. One morning, as Margaret learned to skip stones on the lake, Joshua leaned beside me. "You saved this place," he said. "No," I replied, "it saved us." That night, as I sat in the same spot my father had once sat, his boots worn, his hands strong, I heard his voice in memory. "Margaret, appearances deceive. But ownership, real ownership, is truth." He had been right, but what he never said, what I had to learn, was this: ownership is not just of land or legacy or even stories. It's ownership of love, of silence that shields, of truth that stands. And when we own those things, we become more than caretakers of memory. We become authors of the future.